Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Catch-22 follows the story of Yossarian as he serves in World War II. Yossarian is a bombardier in a bombing unit on the island of Corsica, Italy. Unlike most novels, Catch-22 doesn't flow chronologically, from start to finish, in that order. Instead, the book jumps wildly from present to past to present to future and back again. Confusing, yes, but then again, so is war. And this is the point that Heller tries to make throughout the novel. Throughout most of the novel, Yossarian tries to avoid combat missions. He does everything to avoid them, from faking an illness to trying to get declared insane, to even giving his officers false information, among other attempts to keep from fighting. As the book continues, the story gets darker, more characters die, and Yossarian tries more and more desperately to avoid the increasing amount of missions required. One of the major plot points is Snowden's death. Throughout the novel, it is constantly hinted that something has happened between Yossarian and Snowden. During the last part of the book, we finally get to find out. A part of Yossarian's crew, Snowden is mortally wounded by anti-aircraft fire. Yossarian is forced to help him, mainly because everyone else had passed out.
Even though Yossarian knows that Snowden will most likely die, he tries to patch Snowden up anyway. But when he opens up Snowden's uniform to look for injuries, Snowden's guts spill out over Yossarian, traumatizing him. That leads to Yossarian's realization of the fact that everyone dies. This event also comes back up later in the book.
Tragicomic post-war criticism. That is a very, very simple way to describe Catch-22. But what does this phrase mean?
Tragicomic is a mashup of tragedy and comic. Therefore, it means that the novel is both funny and sad. Post-war simply means that it was released after a war, is usually written about that war, and is written by someone who had some participation in that war. Criticism means that the book was written with the purpose of criticizing a person, organization, or a system.
Let's go by these points one by one.
Mark Anderson, a soldier who was in Vietnam, said, quote, "Catch-22 took one of life's worst experiences and made it funny. Heller understood completely what soldiers encounter in war and identified with their frustration about getting caught in a situation over which they have no control. Heller's humor is what makes the book work." End quote.
In fact, Heller uses the comedy and absurdity of the novel to highlight the flaws in both the novel and reality.
For example, the process of getting admitted to the hospital is random. If you have a temperature over 102 degrees Celsius, you are rushed there. If not, you are given a useless drug and sent back to camp. If you have a temperature of exactly 102 degrees, you are told to come back later when you have made up your mind. The temperature doesn't clarify if you are sick or not. It is just a number that is chosen randomly. The doctor doesn't do any of this. He sits in a corner and mopes while the orderlies base your care on a system that does not help anyone. While this shows how crazy the medical staff is in the novel, it is also commentary on how nonsensical the world is in general. Catch-22 was released many years after World War II, is set during the war in a bombing platoon, and Heller was a bombardier during the war. He served 60 missions, and he enjoyed his time in the service.
So why does Heller write a novel that is so opposed to the war if he actually enjoyed serving in it? In fact, Heller's conception of the novel was not affected in any way by his time spent overseas. However, he did draw some details from his own experience.
For example, Heller's tent once belonged to a deceased soldier whose possessions were left untouched. This also happened to Yossarian in the novel, which led him to complain jokingly to his friends that there was a ghost inside his tent. Although Catch-22 is usually thought of as an anti-World War II novel, if we look at the time period in which it was released, the 1960s, we find out that it was actually a commentary on the Korean and Cold Wars. Catch-22, quote, rallied against the United States' role in the Korean War and the Cold War. The voice that emerged captured the tone of a new generation that had lost respect for authority and refused to take anything at face value. End quote. The novel was, in reality, supposed to represent American society during the Korean and Cold Wars. Although the book seems like an anti-war criticism, Heller has since said that, quote, it is more anti-traditional establishment than anti-war, end quote.
This means that Catch-22 was written as a way to criticize the United States government, the traditional establishment of the time. Yossarian is surrounded by officers who only care about getting promoted, instead of the health of their men or the success of the war. This symbolizes the various politicians and authority figures in the American government that only care about getting re-elected instead of the citizens that they are supposed to serve. Heller also uses one of the more memorable characters, Milo Minderbender, to represent the capitalistic system. Milo, who is in charge of the meals for Yossarian's unit, starts out with a desire to provide the best meals possible for the men. This slowly turns into a multi-level syndicate where Milo buys and sells his product multiple times to drive up the price. In the end, he helps the Germans attack his own base, all for the sake of his own greed.
Heller uses Milo to highlight the flaws of the capitalistic system. Both Milo's actions and the capitalistic system are good in theory. Milo forms a syndicate that benefits all and in which everyone has a share. And capitalism seeks to hand out the American dream to hard workers. In reality, no one benefits from Milo's success because no one actually owns a share, and the American dream turns out to be an illusion. The rich stay rich and the poor stay poor, no matter what. Although the winnings are kept to a select few, when either system fails, they bring everyone down with them. When Milo bought all available Egyptian cotton, and there was no demand for it, he forced it into the mess halls as cotton candy. When the capitalistic system goes through a recession, it always hits the poor individuals the hardest. Catch-22 can be described as a set of unfavorable circumstances where the only escape is blocked by a simple set of rules. For example, when Yossarian asks the doctor if a soldier can be relieved of duty if he is insane, the doctor replies that of course he can, but he has to come and tell the residing doctor that he believes that he is insane. But when Yossarian tries to do just this, the doctor says he can't. He is obviously sane since he is showing concern for his safety, which is a normal response to being in combat. Since Yossarian isn't insane, he has to serve.
Near the end of the novel, Nately, Yossarian's best friend, dies in combat, just after the number of required missions is raised again. Yossarian takes his death very hard and refuses to fly any more missions. This, coupled with the anger that everyone feels over the number of required missions, lowers morale. During a trip to Rome, Yossarian finds Nately's girlfriend, who is also a prostitute, and tells her of Nately's death. She goes crazy with grief and attacks Yossarian, apparently blaming him for the death of Nately. He narrowly escapes, and when he gets back to his squadron, his commanding officers, Korn and Cathcart, offer him a deal. They are afraid that if Yossarian continues to refuse to fly any more missions, the other men will follow his example. So, Yossarian will be promoted and sent home, but only if he agrees to support them in raising the number of missions. On top of that, he also has to treat Korn and Cathcart, both of whom Yossarian hates, like old friends. He knows that to agree to the deal is to portray the men in his squadron, since they would have to fly more missions. But his desire to go home is too strong. He agrees. Just after he agrees to the deal, he is ambushed by Nately's girlfriend, who has followed him back to camp. She stabs him and he passes out. When he wakes up in the hospital, he has a flashback to the moment when Snowden dies. This is when we first find out what really happened to Snowden. Yossarian decides that he can't betray his friends, dead or alive. He rejects the deal and deserts the army, planning to row to Sweden, even though he has very little chance of succeeding. For more information on Catch-22, please visit the links below. Thank you for watching.